The long night clung to Aethelgard like a shroud woven from stardust and frozen despair. Kael, his breath misting in the frigid air, squinted against the faint, ethereal glow that haloed the jagged peaks in the distance. It was not the dawn, not yet. Just the aurora Aethelgardis, a haunting display of emerald and sapphire light, a constant reminder of the planet's lost glory. They called it the ghost of emerald ice. Beautiful, deadly, and forever out of reach. Once, Aethelgard had been a beacon. A blue-green jewel suspended in the inky blackness of the Xylos system, a vital refueling station and mining outpost for the sprawling Galactic Alliance. Ships, the size of frozen asteroids, would descend from the orbital tethers, their thrusters leaving fleeting rainbows on the icy horizon. They came for the Crillium, a rare mineral found deep within the Aethelgardian glaciers, crucial for powering advanced Alliance technologies. The Crillium boom had brought prosperity, albeit fleeting. Cities of shimmering crystal and reinforced polymers sprouted from the frozen plains, connected by networks of pressurized tubes and magnetic levitation rails. Thawing stations, massive complexes powered by geothermal energy, kept pockets of land fertile for hydroponics, providing sustenance for the miners, engineers, scientists, and their families who flocked to Aethelgard. It was all thanks to the Mining Covenant, a complex agreement between the Galactic Alliance and the Aethelgardian Consortium. The Covenant promised mutual benefit. The Alliance received a steady supply of Crillium, and Aethelgard would gain advanced technologies, infrastructure, and lasting security. A hollow promise, as Kael knew all too well. He, Kaelan, was a native. Born and raised in the glittering city of Glacia Prime, he had witnessed the tail end of Aethelgard's golden age. His father, a respected engineer, had worked on the thawing stations. Kael remembered summers spent exploring the crystal caverns beneath the city, the thrill of watching the towering excavators harvest the Crillium. He remembered the laughter, the music, the vibrant tapestry of cultures brought together by the allure of wealth and progress. He remembered the hope. Hope that, like the emerald ice, was now locked away, frozen in time. The prosperity of Aethelgard was built on a foundation of ice, both literally and figuratively. The Crillium veins were finite, and the Alliance's insatiable demand pushed the miners to ever more reckless depths. Safety protocols were ignored, warnings were dismissed, and corners were cut in the relentless pursuit of profit. Then came the Great Collapse. A chain reaction of geological instability, triggered by the rampant exploitation of the planet's geothermal vents. Ice sheets fractured, mountains crumbled, and cities were swallowed whole in avalanches of ice and debris. The network of thawing stations shattered, plunging the planet into a new ice age, even more unforgiving than before. The Alliance, predictably, abandoned Aethelgard to its fate. Citing the unforeseen consequences of the Mining Covenant, they severed all ties, leaving behind a planet choked with death and a population scrambling for survival. Life support systems failed, infrastructure crumbled, and the once harmonious community fractured into warring factions, desperate for dwindling resources. Kael, barely a teenager at the time, lost everything. His father was crushed in a tunnel collapse. His mother and younger sister were caught in a sudden blizzard, their life signs fading out on his comms as the howling winds swallowed their cries. He had clung to their memory with all his might, until now almost nothing but a whisper. In the aftermath, Kael scavenged, adapted, and hardened. He learned to navigate the treacherous landscape, to hunt the mutated, bioluminescent creatures that roamed the frozen wastes. He became skilled at repairing damaged technology, piecing together scraps of equipment to survive. He became known as the Ghost of the Ice, a solitary figure haunting the ruins of Aethelgard. Now, he continued down into the crevice, the memory of his family pushing him. The initial tremors were subtle, dismissed as aftershocks from the deep mining operations that clawed at Aethelgard's crust. Then came the grinding. A low, guttural groan that resonated through the ice plains, shaking the crystal spires of Glacia Prime and rattling the bones in Kael's young body. His father, Elian, a supervisor at Thawing Station Delta 7, had tried to reassure him. "Just a bit of tectonic shifting, Kaelan," he'd said, his voice echoing from his helmet. Nothing to worry about. These ice cities are built to withstand anything. Elian was wrong. The first sign of real trouble wasn't an earthquake, but the sky. It fractured. Or, at least, that's how it appeared to Kael. The aurora Aethelgardis, usually a shimmering curtain of emerald and sapphire, began to flicker erratically, its colors shifting and distorting. Then, cracks, thin and blood-red, appeared, snaking across the celestial canvas like veins in a dying heart. The Great Collapse, as it became known in hushed whispers and terrified screams, was not merely a geological event. It was a cascade of failures, a catastrophic unraveling of everything that had been built on Aethelgard. The geothermal vents, destabilized by years of exploitation, erupted. Explosions of superheated steam tore through the ice, creating chasms that swallowed entire districts of Glacia Prime. The thawing stations, designed to maintain a delicate balance, went haywire, flooding sections of the city with scalding water or plunging them into absolute zero. The pressurized tubes connecting the cities ruptured, spewing out vital atmosphere into the frigid void. But worse than the geological chaos was the societal collapse. The mining covenant, once the bedrock of Aethelgard's prosperity, turned into a death warrant. With resources dwindling and escape impossible for most, the carefully constructed veneer of civilization shattered. The Galactic Alliance, hundreds of light years away, declared Aethelgard a lost cause. They sealed the orbital tethers, leaving behind millions of people to perish. The few remaining ships, commandeered by desperate factions, fought tooth and nail for the limited access to the sky. Law enforcement disappeared, replaced by gangs preying on the weak. Food reserves were looted, and the carefully managed hydroponic systems were destroyed in the ensuing riots. The most basic tenets of civilization, trust, cooperation, empathy, dissolved like snowflakes on a plasma torch. Even faith faltered. The Order of the Eternal Flame, the dominant religious sect on Aethelgard, preached that the Crillium held the key to spiritual enlightenment. When the Great Collapse struck, many lost their faith, their leaders unable to explain why the Eternal Flame had failed to protect them. The temples were abandoned, replaced by makeshift bunkers and strongholds. Kael witnessed the disintegration firsthand. He was working as an apprentice mechanic in the lower districts of Glacia Prime when the first tremors struck. His father, frantically trying to maintain the power grid, ordered him to get his mother and sister to the emergency shelters. That was the last time he saw Elian. He navigated the chaotic streets, dodging falling debris and desperate looters. He reached his family's apartment just as the emergency sirens began to wail. His mother Anya, a botanist who had always found beauty in the most desolate landscapes, was packing a small bag with dried rations and a few treasured keepsakes. His younger sister, Lyra, a bright-eyed child with a talent for music, clung to his leg, her face streaked with tears. The emergency shelter was a nightmare. Thousands of people crammed into a claustrophobic space, the air thick with the smell of sweat and fear. There were whispers of rationing, of power failures, of the Alliance abandoning them. Anya, always the pragmatist, kept Kael and Lyra close, sharing their meager rations and trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Then came the lulls, where some semblance of society remained. People would help each other, and some would even play music. Lyra and Kael were known for their ability to play songs of their past, and make the others not afraid. But then, one of the ice caves that supplied water to the city collapsed. The city began to fall silent as people's hope was quickly replaced by panic. Anya, using her knowledge of plants and water, began to explore the caves in hopes of finding a way to save people. The end came swiftly. A section of the glacier above the shelter fractured, sending a torrent of ice and snow crashing down upon them. The shelter, built to withstand earthquakes, was no match for the sheer force of the avalanche. A wave of ice and snow engulfed them, burying the shelter and its inhabitants alive. Kael, thrown clear by the impact, watched in horror as the avalanche swallowed his mother and sister. He clawed at the ice, desperate to reach them, but it was futile. Their life signs flickered on his comms and then went dark. He was alone. In the days that followed, Kael wandered the ruins, haunted by the ghosts of his family, and the memories of a life that was no more. He scavenged for scraps, fought off scavengers and beasts, and gradually hardened himself against the pain. He became a ghost himself, a silent figure roaming the frozen wasteland, driven by a primal instinct to survive, but with little hope left in his heart. The memory of the great collapse would forever be etched into Kael's soul. A reminder of the fragility of civilization, the ruthlessness of nature, and the enduring power of loss. Now all of that will be tested with the alien woman that is in his life. Kael's survival wasn't just luck, it was a testament to his resourcefulness, his relentless adaptability, and a skill set honed by necessity. He wasn't a soldier, a scientist, or a leader. He was a mechanic, a scavenger, a ghost in the machine, haunting the icy veins of a dying world. His most valuable asset wasn't a weapon, though he carried one. It was his mind, his ability to understand how things worked, how they broke, and how they could be made to work again, even with the most limited resources. The skills his father had taught him, the principles of engineering and thermodynamics, were now more precious than any Crillium crystal. He could coax sputtering generators back to life, reroute power through tangled conduits, and salvage precious components from the wreckage of pre-collapse technology. His workshop, deep within a hidden alcove of the bear's den, was a testament to his ingenuity, a chaotic collection of wires, gears, plasma torches, and salvage tools, all illuminated by the flickering glow of repurposed energy cells. The secret to surviving on Aethelgard, Kael had learned, wasn't just about staying warm. It was about managing heat. He knew the subtle shifts in the permafrost, the location of the geothermal vents, and the most efficient ways to capture and channel that energy for heating, cooking, and powering his equipment. He could identify the faintest shimmer of geothermal radiation, the subtle signs that indicated a potential source of warmth. But his most crucial tool was his protective suit. It was a patchwork creation, assembled from scavenged components and reinforced with salvaged polymers. The original suit had belonged to an Alliance survey team, a high-tech marvel designed to withstand the extreme conditions of Aethelgard. Kael had painstakingly repaired and modified it over the years, adding layers of insulation, enhancing its camouflage capabilities, and installing a sophisticated toxin filtration system. The suit wasn't just protection, it was an extension of himself. He could feel the temperature fluctuations in the environment, the subtle shifts in wind direction, the pressure changes that heralded an impending storm. The camouflage system allowed him to blend seamlessly into the icy landscape, making him nearly invisible to both human and animal predators. The filtration system, vital for surviving in a world polluted by volcanic gases and industrial waste, was a constant hum against his ears, a reminder of the toxic reality outside. But his suit couldn't protect him from the icy grip of his memories. Despite his hardened exterior, Kael was haunted by the ghosts of his past. In his dreams, he would relive the great collapse, seeing the icy walls closing in, hearing the cries of his family as they were swallowed by the avalanche. He would wake up gasping for breath, his body drenched in cold sweat, the phantom weight of grief pressing down on him. Sometimes, he would find himself staring into the aurora-lit sky, wondering if Anya and Lyra were somehow watching over him. Were they waiting for him in some ethereal afterlife, or had they simply ceased to exist, their lives extinguished like a flickering candle? The uncertainty tormented him, driving him to question the very value of his survival. Was he simply delaying the inevitable, prolonging his own suffering in a world that had no place for hope? He would often fall into these moods for days at a time, but his purpose wouldn't let him stay down for too long. He had to survive, he knew he had to. His survival wasn't driven by any grand ambition or sense of purpose. It was a primal instinct, a deep-seated refusal to surrender to the forces that had taken everything from him. Sometimes, when he was alone in the vast emptiness of the wasteland, he would stare into his own reflection in a sheet of ice and wonder if he was truly alive, or just a walking corpse, animated by grief and fueled by a stubborn refusal to die. The line between survival and mere existence had blurred long ago. He was a master of his craft, a survivor in a world designed to kill. But beneath the icy shell, Kael remained a broken man, haunted by the ghosts of his past and wrestling with the burden of his survival. He was a tapestry of harsh adaptation, ingenuity and resilience, and brokenness. All those aspects would soon be challenged by one very unlikely arrival. The SOS crackled to life on Kael's salvaged comms unit, a ragged, distorted whisper slicing through the monotonous hum of the geothermal generator in his ice Denver. For months the comms had been silent, a testament to Aethelgard's isolation, a cold, dead line to a galaxy that had abandoned it. He nearly dismissed the signal as interference, a stray echo bouncing off the ionosphere. But something in the fragmented syllables, a desperate urgency, snagged his attention. He adjusted the gain, his fingers calloused and scarred from years of manipulating ancient technology. The language was alien, a guttural mix of clicks and whistles that sounded like wind chimes in a blizzard. But even without understanding the words, Kael could sense the fear, the desperation clinging to the edges of the signal. The source was traced to the Wailing Ridge, a desolate range that held a deep history with the people of Aethelgard. He had a choice: ignore the plea, seal himself back into the relative safety of the Hangbang, and continue his solitary existence. Or venture out into the heart of the worst region, face untold dangers, and risk his life for someone he didn't know, speaking a language he didn't understand. The logical part of Kael's brain screamed at him to stay put. Resources were scarce, the journey would be treacherous, and the odds of finding anyone alive, let alone rescuing them, were astronomically low. Every instinct honed by years of survival told him that this was a fool's errand, a reckless gamble that could cost him everything. But the echoes of his past were louder now. He couldn't get the images of his family leaving from his head. The ghost of the lost rescue ship, a tragedy that still weighed on Kael. The voices of his mother and sister, fading into the blizzard winds, pleading for help that never came. He knew what it felt like to be abandoned, to be left to die in the cold. The memory burned like frostbite on his soul. He thought of Anya, his wife, always willing to help those in need, even when it meant risking her own life. Before the collapse, Anya was an engineer with a bright future ahead. He thought to himself, what would she do? He also knew the dangers of the Wailing Ridge. The blizzards could whip up in minutes, reducing visibility to near zero and burying travelers beneath layers of unforgiving ice. The terrain was treacherous, riddled with hidden crevasses and unstable ice formations. Then there were the creatures, mutated ice scavengers drawn to the scent of blood and fear. Answering the call would be suicide. It would be just like his family who died exploring these ridges. Yet the signal continued, a faint, desperate pulse against the relentless silence of Aethelgard. As his finger hovered over the power switch, another vivid image flashed through Kael's mind, his younger sister, Lyra, her bright eyes wide with terror as the avalanche roared down upon them. Could he live with himself if he ignored another cry for help, knowing that someone else might be facing the same agonizing fate? It was more than curiosity. It was a desperate need to prove that something good could still come from this desolate world. That even in the face of unimaginable loss, compassion could still exist, that humanity wasn't entirely extinguished on Aethelgard. For a time, the past pulled him. For another, the fear, but the idea to help this alien woman pulled the young Kael out. It was a very long and agonizing decision to make. Finally, as the wind howled and the aurora danced a mocking jig across the sky, Kael made a decision. He let out a heavy sigh, he flipped the power switch. A red light flared on the comms unit, confirming the signal was live. He started the generator and gave power to the rover. He prepared for the most crucial journey in his life. The Wailing Ridge lived up to its name. The wind shrieked like tortured spirits as Kael navigated the blizzard, the landscape a blinding swirl of white. His modified snow rover, a hulking machine of scavenged parts, struggled against the icy gusts, its treads barely gripping the treacherous terrain. The comms unit, still locked onto the distress signal, led him toward an area of distorted energy readings where the rescue ship lay. The ship was a disaster, more of an ice sculpture than a vessel. A chunk of mountain, dislodged by the Great Collapse, had taken a direct hit, shearing off a section of the hull and burying the rest in a prison of ice and rock. Cautiously, Kael secured his rover behind a ridge of ice. His suit's environmental seals hissed as he depressurized the cockpit, the frigid air biting at his exposed skin as he donned his helmet. Every step was a calculated risk, the wind threatening to send him tumbling into a hidden crevasse. He approached the wreckage slowly, his pulse rifle raised, scanning for any sign of movement. The interior of the ship was a twisted labyrinth of metal and ice. Wires hung like frozen veins, sparks intermittently showering from severed power conduits. The air was thick with the metallic tang of ozone and the cloying scent of something organic. Kael activated his helmet's infrared scanner. The images flickered across his visor, outlining the twisted shapes of the wreckage, highlighting pockets of heat, and revealing a figure. It was wedged deep within a section of the ship that had somehow remained relatively intact, pinned beneath a collapsed support beam. A human would have been crushed instantly. This figure, however, was different. Her form was partially obscured by debris, but enough was visible to tell Kael that this was not a native of Aethelgard, nor was it a human from any colony or ship he had ever known. Her skin was an unusual shade of blue, a deep, almost iridescent cerulean that seemed to absorb the faint light. Hair of pink cascaded from under the damaged envirosuit. There were markings, dark and almost tribal in appearance, etched in her face. His gaze settled on her eyes. They were violet and piercing. The suit she wore, or what remained of it, was unlike anything Kael had ever seen. It was sleeker, more streamlined than the bulky Alliance models, crafted from materials that shimmered and shifted colors with the changing light. A portion of the helmet was gone, ripped away by the impact, revealing the extent of her injuries. She was covered in wounds and scars. Her left arm was twisted at an unnatural angle, pinned beneath the support beam. A jagged gash ran across her forehead, a trickle of bioluminescent fluid, xylem blood staining her skin. What struck Kael most was her posture. Despite the obvious pain and the near impossible circumstances, Lumina still held herself with a certain dignity, an air of defiance that refused to be extinguished. One hand, free from the debris, clenched into a fist, knuckles white against her blue skin. The other reached, almost pleadingly, to the sky. As Kael approached, the woman's violet eyes flickered open. They were luminous, filled with a pain and something that seemed like despair. Kael's initial suspicion gave way to a surge of compassion. He began speaking in his language and offering her gestures of help. Now, he had a new objective. He needed to help save this woman, and he knew he had to do everything he could. Her eyes were pleading him to, as they told him it was just what she wanted to tell him. She did not seem like someone bad. This was when he would make his decision, now, at this moment. His hand hovered in anticipation over his gun, ready to shoot at any time. The fate of both of them, laid before them, now in this chamber of death and broken technology. The air in the rescue ship was thick with anticipation, tinged with the sharp tang of ozone and the cloying sweetness of xylem fluid. Kael, his pulse pounding in his ears, took a step closer to the wounded Lumina, careful to keep his movements slow and deliberate. The scene was a carefully choreographed ballet of trust and apprehension. One wrong step, one misinterpreted gesture, and the delicate truce could shatter. Before him, Lumina was like something out of legend, a creature of myth brought to life in the cold, harsh reality of Aethelgard. While Kael was forged by this planet, his body adapted to the cold and the dark, Lumina radiated a completely alien air. Her skin, a gradient of blues, seemed to reflect the aurora in its depths, and her hair, the color of nebulae dust, cascaded around her face, framing features that defied easy categorization. Her cheekbones were high and pronounced, her chin delicately sharp, and her lips possessed a subtle curve that hinted at a capacity for both laughter and sorrow. But it was her eyes, those luminous violet pools, that held Kael captive. They seemed to peer directly into his soul, conveying a depth of emotion that transcended language. Kael knew he couldn't simply assume Lumina understood him. Years of interacting with desperate scavengers and ruthless Reavers had taught him the importance of clear, unambiguous communication. But how could he communicate with someone from another world, someone whose biology and culture were utterly foreign? He started with the basics. Pointing to himself, he mouthed his name slowly, carefully enunciating each syllable. Kael. Kaelin Thorn. He then pointed to her, hoping she would reciprocate. Her violet eyes flickered with understanding, but she remained silent. Perhaps her vocal cords were damaged, or perhaps her species simply lacked the physical structures for human speech. Instead, she raised her good hand, her fingers tracing a complex symbol on the dusty metal wall. It was a swirling, geometric pattern, unlike anything Kael had ever seen. He tried to replicate it on his glove, hoping to convey that he understood it was her name. Lumina watched him with a curious gaze. After Kael finished his replication, her arm moved forward and she placed his finger again on the wall, tracing over Kael's hand while making a vocal purr that sounded like her laughing. Kael knew it wasn't a perfect system, but it was a start. He decided to use a combination of gestures and visual aids to convey his intentions. Pointing to his mouth, he mimed the act of eating, then held up a dried ration bar. Lumina nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. Next, he needed to address her injuries. He pointed to the twisted arm, then mimed the action of setting a broken bone. Her eyes widened with apprehension, and she shook her head. He knew she was likely terrified, distrustful of a stranger in a strange and hostile environment. He needed to show her that he was trying to help, not to harm. He slowly lowered his weapon and placed it on the ground, making a clear gesture of surrender. Then, he took a small, salvaged medkit from his belt, carefully displaying its contents: bandages, antiseptic, and a painkiller injector. He pointed to the gash on her forehead, then mimed the application of antiseptic, his movements gentle and deliberate. Lumina watched him intently, her violet eyes unwavering. She seemed to be weighing her options, trying to gauge his sincerity. Her fear, Kael could feel, was nearly palpable. Then, something unexpected happened. She used the hand, almost pleadingly, to his face and gave him a sad, knowing look. Then, she closed her eyes and gave a slight nod. Kael's heart broke for this girl, alone, hurt, not knowing if she could trust him. With the slightest shake in his hands, he took out a damp cloth to wipe away what he could in the wound. The touch made her flinch. Getting Lumina back to Bear's Den was a feat of endurance, a testament to Kael's strength and Lumina's quiet determination. The rover, designed for a single occupant, strained under the added weight, its treads slipping on the treacherous ice. The biting wind, a constant presence on Aethelgard, seemed to mock their efforts, whipping snow into their faces and stealing away their heat. Kael had made a makeshift harness to support Lumina's injured arm, improvising with scavenged straps and a thermal blanket. But the journey was agonizing for her. Every jolt of the rover, every gust of wind, elicited a silent gasp, a tremor that rippled through her body. He stopped frequently, offering her sips of recycled water and murmuring words of encouragement, though he doubted she understood. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the familiar silhouette of the Wailing Ridge loomed before them. The icy spires, usually a source of foreboding, now felt like a welcoming beacon, a promise of warmth and relative safety. The entrance to Bear's Den was hidden behind a collapsed ice wall, camouflaged with layers of snow and rock. It was a tight squeeze for the rover, the passage leading into a narrow, winding tunnel. Kael carefully maneuvered the vehicle, its headlights casting dancing shadows on the glistening ice walls. The den itself was an anomaly, a haven carved into the glacier's heart. A natural fissure had been widened and reinforced with scavenged metal supports, creating a chamber shielded from the worst of Aethelgard's fury. Geothermal vents, cleverly tapped and channeled, provided a constant source of heat, maintaining a relatively stable temperature that hovered just above freezing. It wasn't exactly tropical, but after weeks of living in the frozen wastes, it felt like paradise. Inside, the den was Spartan but functional. Bunks fashioned from salvaged ship plating lined the walls, covered in thermal blankets and worn furs. A small cooking area featured a rudimentary stove powered by geothermal energy, along with a collection of dented pots and pans. Shelves carved into the ice held a meager supply of dried rations, medical supplies, and salvaged tools. The air filtration system, painstakingly assembled from salvaged components, hummed quietly in the background, removing the toxic gases that permeated the outside world. Kael relied on this system with an urgency. He didn't want Lumina to get any worse. And then, there were the keepsakes. Tucked away in a small niche, protected from the elements, were the remnants of Kael's former life: a faded photo of his family, his wife's old necklace, a hand-carved wooden flute that Lyra used to play. These were the reminders that he had had in his previous life. With Lumina safely resting on one of the bunks, Kael set about making her as comfortable as possible. He cleaned her wounds with antiseptic, bandaging them with practiced efficiency. He offered her a thermal blanket, carefully wrapping it around her shivering form. He even managed to coax her into drinking some warm broth, a concoction made from recycled water and dried algae. His body warmed with her inside. That night, huddled beside the geothermal vent, Kael tried to explain to Lumina what had happened to Aethelgard. He used gestures, drawings on the ice, and a few salvaged holographic projections to convey the story of the mining boom, the Great Collapse, and the Alliance's abandonment. Lumina watched intently, her violet eyes reflecting the flickering light of the vent. She seemed to understand the concept of a lost civilization, of a world consumed by greed and ecological disaster. She asked not a single thing to Kael. One evening, while they were eating their meager meal, Kael took out the wooden flute, a memento of his time before the tragedy struck. To his surprise, Lumina perked up with excitement. He nodded to his face, and she mirrored with her fingers. Kael, to pass the time, started playing a song, and Lumina with the purrs of her throat. She played a beat on her hip, and the duo began a band together. Weeks turned into months in the relative sanctuary of Bear's Den. Lumina healed, her body adapting with surprising speed to the harsh Aethelgardian environment. But their dwindling supplies cast a long shadow over their newfound tranquility. The protein vats were running low, the algae farms were struggling under the dim geothermal light, and the scavenging runs were becoming increasingly dangerous. Kael couldn't risk the survival of them both on a single, dwindling resource pool. The decision was inevitable, but difficult. They needed to move on, to find a more sustainable source of food and resources. But where? Kael knew Aethelgard like the back of his hand, and the options were grim. Most of the accessible ruins had been picked clean years ago. The few remaining settlements were fiercely guarded, often hostile to outsiders. He spread a tattered map of Aethelgard across a bunk, the faint glow of a handheld projector illuminating its worn surface. Lumina, still unable to speak his language, watched intently, her violet eyes tracing the intricate lines and symbols. The Wailing Ridge? Kael pointed to a heavily marked area in the western mountains. Legends say there's an ancient settlement hidden deep within. The Citadel of Echoes. A place built before the collapse. He knew it was a long shot. The Citadel of Echoes was more myth than reality, a whisper passed down through generations of survivors. Most dismissed it as a fairy tale, a desperate hope in a world devoid of optimism. But Kael saw something in Lumina's eyes when he mentioned it, a flicker of recognition, a spark of something he couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps, he thought, it was worth the risk. Lumina nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the projected map. She tapped a finger on a particular cluster of mountains, then mimed the act of climbing, of enduring extreme cold. Kael understood. She knew the dangers, but she was willing to face them. The next several weeks were dedicated to preparation and training. Kael, a harsh but effective instructor, drilled Lumina on the fundamental skills she needed to survive in the frozen wastes. Shelter building. He showed her how to construct temporary shelters from snow and ice, how to identify sheltered alcoves, and how to reinforce existing structures against the wind and cold. Heat sources. He taught her to locate geothermal vents, to build efficient fires using scavenged fuel, and to identify the signs of hypothermia. Animal identification and avoidance. He showed her the tracks and habits of the local fauna, the mutated ice wolves, the scavenging snowhawks, and the bioluminescent frost stalkers. He emphasized avoidance above all else, but also taught her how to defend herself if necessary. It was during these training sessions that Kael truly began to appreciate the extent of Lumina's unique abilities. Her physiology was clearly adapted to extreme environments. She could withstand temperatures that would freeze a human solid. Her vision was acute, able to pierce through the thickest blizzards. And her strength, despite her slender frame, was remarkable. But what truly set Lumina apart were her energy-based abilities. He had learned that Lumina was a warrior priestess from her homeworld. During their combat drills, she can utilize a powerful energy force called xylem to attack. She utilized ancient training techniques. These included projectiles. She could launch blasts or streams of concentrated force, capable of shattering ice or disabling machinery. Defense. She could create shields of shimmering energy. Enhancement. Augment her strength and speed beyond normal level. Kael, though initially skeptical, quickly recognized the power of these abilities. He adapted his own fighting style to complement hers, combining his knowledge of close-quarters combat with her energy-based attacks. Despite these efforts, the language barrier was a constant challenge. Kael tried to learn Lumina's native tongue. It resulted in little more than some funny looks. One lesson where Kael almost died due to a beast got his understanding increased. While they were fighting, the two shouted in a frantic tone at each other. After the fight, they were able to understand some key words. Leaving the relative comfort of Bear's Den was like stepping into the maw of a frozen beast. The temperature plummeted, and the wind, already ferocious, became a howling gale that threatened to rip them from their feet. Snow, fine as powdered glass, stung their exposed skin, finding its way into every crack and crevice in their armor. The Wailing Ridge earned its name not just from its jagged, ice-sculpted peaks but from the mournful cries of the wind as it swept through its labyrinthine valleys and canyons. The mountains were like the teeth of some monstrous, skeletal beast, clawing at the sky, a perpetual threat to those who dared to traverse its frozen domain. Kael led the way, his internal compass calibrated to the subtle shifts in the magnetic field, his senses sharpened by years of navigating this treacherous terrain. Lumina followed closely behind, her violet eyes constantly scanning the horizon, her body moving with a newfound grace and confidence. She had taken to survival on Aethelgard with the quiet determination of a plant thrusting through the permafrost, adapting and thriving where others would have perished. The deeper they ventured into the ridge, the more hostile the environment became. Blizzards descended with blinding speed, reducing visibility to mere feet and burying them under layers of suffocating snow. They were forced to seek shelter in ice caves, huddling together for warmth, rationing their dwindling supplies. Kael took up the first watches. As she slept, she saw him stare ahead, his mind lost somewhere in the endless expanse of the blizzard. One day while they were walking along the ridges, they found it. They found signs of them, the ones that Kael thought were only stories to scare people. The Reavers, the scavengers. Kael felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. The tracks were fresh, almost no snow over them. The tales of the Reavers were horrific, gangs of desperate survivors who had abandoned all pretense of morality, preying on the weak, looting and murdering for scraps of food and technology. They were said to be brutal, merciless, and utterly devoid of human compassion. Kael had always dismissed them as campfire stories, but the evidence before him suggested otherwise. He quickly changed his approach. He taught Lumina how to camouflage, hide and become invisible in the wastes. They were going to be taking this seriously. He looked at her, worried about what would happen if the Reavers found them. Her eyes had no fear, instead, what he saw was a surge of eagerness. As they cautiously pushed deeper into the canyon, they started to smell it. Death. The decay of old bio-waste, a few bodies and a pile of used medical supplies. People were here, and they were not in a good condition. It was clear that the Reavers had been here. Kael and Lumina moved forward. He was getting close. He could feel it. They had to find where these Reavers were and take them out. During the journey, Kael had let her guard down. He was ready to tell Lumina what happened to his family. As they were getting to know each other, there were moments where Lumina would try to act a certain way that she thought Kael would be. It became clear that she idolized him to a certain extent. Before all of this, my wife, Enio, was a researcher. A botanist. Kael looked off into the distance as they approached the ruins, remembering her beauty. Her mind. He smiled and soothed the memory before he continued. During the collapse, she was a leader, a protector, a brilliant woman in the worst of situations. She always looked at the best in anything. Tears started welling up in his eyes. We also had a daughter, Lyra. She was very interested in music and sound. I would tell her stories, she loved them too. He wiped his face and shook his head. They both died during the collapse. Kael's face grew sullen. Lumina's face did what it could to return sympathy. It felt strange coming from her, almost alien, but Kael appreciated the effort. They continued on. The Wailing Ridge finally yielded, opening into a wide basin carved into the heart of the mountains. Here, nestled against the towering ice walls, lay the abandoned mining complex, a stark and haunting reminder of Aethelgard's fleeting prosperity. It was vast, far larger than Kael had imagined, a sprawling network of interconnected structures that seemed to cling to the mountainside. Buildings of shimmering crystal and reinforced polymers, now cracked and fractured, cast long, skeletal shadows across the snow-covered basin. The network of pressurized tunnels and magnetic levitation rails, once a vital artery of the complex, lay in twisted ruins, choked with ice and debris. But what struck Kael most was the silence. It was a silence so profound, so absolute, that it pressed against his eardrums like a physical force. It wasn't the natural silence of the wilderness, the quiet hum of the wind or the gentle crunch of snow. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, a silence that swallowed sound and stifled breath. The journey into the basin was torturous, and as slow as the snow fell. Kael and Lumina proceeded with extreme caution, their senses heightened, their pulse rifles raised. The only sounds were their own breathing and the crunch of their boots on the snow-covered ice. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, adding to the eerie stillness. As they drew closer to the main complex, they began to notice subtle details that hinted at a darker story. Patches of ice stained crimson, frozen blood and bodies laid everywhere. Shattered windows and twisted metal revealed signs of a brutal struggle. The silence, previously just oppressive, now felt malevolent, as if the very air was holding its breath in anticipation. Kael picked up a corroded datapad near a broken airlock. He managed to power it on, revealing a series of fragmented logs and images. The datapad belonged to a security officer from the Aethelgardian Consortium, a man named Vorin. His last message: "They came in the night. Silent as the ice itself. We fought, but they were too many." More logs showed of the Reavers' brutality. As Kael scrolled through them, he couldn't help but feel like he was going to be sick. He stopped and stared off at the sky before proceeding. The discoveries didn't stop, and after they traveled further, they could see the end of it all: death. Corpses with holes in their skulls, some with markings that showed some form of ritual, and then some more. What was going on here? Kael shuddered his head. So this is what happened, is it? The desolation of the mining complex weighed heavily on Kael. He felt the familiar despair creeping in, the nagging sense that they were searching for ghosts in a graveyard. The sight of the dead was beginning to chip away at Lumina's resolve, too. So they had to leave, and fast. "We have to move on," Kael said to Lumina. Lumina looked down. She seemed sad that more couldn't be recovered and that they weren't enough. Kael sighed. "Hey," he tapped Lumina's head and gave her a smile. Lumina returned that smile with a nod. Despite the ominous atmosphere, the need for supplies was paramount. Kael decided to check one last area, a vast network of ice caves rumored to have been used for storing processed Krillium. He warned Lumina to stay close to the entrance, promising to be back within the hour. The air in the caves was noticeably warmer, thick with the oppressive humidity of the geothermal vents. Bioluminescent fungi cast an eerie glow on the ice walls, illuminating strange and distorted formations. Kael moved cautiously, his pulse rifle raised, his senses on high alert. He found a storeroom, its reinforced door partially collapsed, a jumbled mess of supplies spilling out into the tunnel. Rations, medical supplies, tools, a treasure trove of the essentials they desperately needed. As Kael moved to haul the bags back, a change fell on the caverns. It started as a low rumble, a tremor that resonated through the ice. Then came the cracking, a series of sharp, explosive sounds that echoed through the tunnels. Kael knew what it was instantly: an ice quake, a sudden fracturing of the unstable glacier. He was already too far in the depths and had to act fast. He spun around, shouting at Lumina to turn back. He started running towards his loved one. He was too late. The roof of the tunnel collapsed, sending a cascade of ice and snow crashing down upon him. He was thrown off his feet, the world dissolving into a chaos of blinding white and deafening noise. He was being buried. He saw Lumina in his sights, then everything went dark. Everything hurt. Consciousness returned in fragments. First, a bone-chilling cold that gnawed at his exposed skin. Then, the crushing weight of the ice, a sensation that threatened to suffocate him with every breath. Darkness. Absolute, impenetrable darkness. Panic clawed at Kael's throat. He tried to move, but his body was pinned beneath a mountain of ice and debris. The suit's environmental systems were failing, the oxygen levels dropping rapidly. He was running out of time. His past was on him. That was all he felt, in this place. But now, more than ever, he was remembering the words of his wife, and the joy of his daughter. He couldn't die, not like this. Not again. Then, a faint sound pierced through the suffocating silence. The unmistakable rhythmic thump of Lumina's energy pulses. She was alive. And she was looking for him. Kael focused on survival, not panic. He can hold out just a bit longer. He had to give her a signal. He had to guide her to his location. He activated the distress beacon in his comms unit. He was running out of oxygen, the pain was unbearable, and his vision started to fade. With one last push, he spoke to the comms, hoping it can reach his friend. Lumina. I'm here. He blacked out. He heard a soft crack. The light exploded back into him as an amazing force pushed the ice away from on top of him. It was her. He saw Lumina standing before him, her face a mask of determination, xylem energy crackling around her hands, and the area around them, broken to pieces. He couldn't believe it. Lumina had saved him. She had defied the impossible, risked her life to save his. A human would have been crushed, but she wasn't human. Days blurred into weeks as Kael and Lumina pushed eastward, deeper into the Wailing Ridge. The subtle shift towards spring continued, the biting winds gradually replaced by a softer breeze carrying the faintest hint of thawing earth. Kael knew this early thaw could be deceptive, a false promise before the true fury of the ice returned. But for now, it was a blessing, making the journey slightly less punishing. The silence of the ridge began to yield small, tentative sounds. The faint trickle of melting ice, the rustling of wind through hardy, frost-resistant grasses, the distant cry of a snowhawk circling overhead. These weren't the sounds of civilization, but they were the sounds of life, a welcome change from the oppressive silence of the dead cities. One evening, Kael came across something that made her feel excited. It was the Citadel. Their long journey had finally come to an end. This place was a city, not in shape, but it could be a place for life. Although it had been taken over by Reavers. The perimeter walls were heavily guarded by the Reavers. Both Kael and Lumina could spot at least 10 different guards from the distance, and Kael would not have been surprised if the rest of the encampment had been guarded as well. However, Lumina gave off an unfazed state and took control of the operation. Kael watched, amazed. They waited for hours, even days before they made their move. He saw a lot of horrible things go on in the camp, things that Kael wouldn't even have considered in his lifetime before this. After so much waiting, Lumina told Kael. Today. So that's what happened. Using the techniques, the light dimmed. As they snuck close to the base, they took out 2 guards with ease. They found what looked like a power console. If they could take out the power, they would not be able to warn the other Reavers, and they could attack the main body. They had to continue. With a flick of Lumina's hand, she disabled power to the whole camp. They got to the center quickly but were overwhelmed and the camp was in chaos. Kael started going to work. He was running and gunning, taking out everything in his path with the new tech and the experience. It made it almost easy. They fought and clawed. They made it work, as a team. After the events cleared up, they had to move on. So much was lost at the Citadel, and it could be possible that people were coming. Kael then started calling for survivors of Aethelgard, if anyone could hear them. And then, someone returned the call. When they find them, they would start together.